Amid the blackouts caused by repeated Russian attacks on the Ukrainian energy infrastructure, Kyiv's envoys are preparing for another round of peace talks with the Kremlin. And to talk about it, we're joined by William B. Taylor, former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. Good evening, Mr. Ambassador.
Good evening, Maciej.
So Donald Trump likes to repeat he has good personal relations with Vladimir Putin, despite the American president claiming there would be no attacks on Ukrainian cities for a week. Russia only holds its strikes on energy infrastructure and only until tomorrow. Should we then expect any reaction from the US for apparently Vladimir Putin breaking his promise?
We should, Maciej. We absolutely should. This is one of a long string of promises that President Putin will have broken. He's made commitments to President Trump before. He has made promises that he's ready to compromise, that he's willing to come to the table to talk about a ceasefire, and none of that's true. So when he breaks this again, as you say, very likely tomorrow, this will be one of a kind. And then President Trump will have the opportunity and the incentive to put real pressure on Putin.
Well, on the other hand, Russia's top negotiator, Kirill Dmitriev, is already in the U.S. He has met with U.S. representatives ahead of the next round of negotiations between Moscow and Kyiv. Now, will he try to convince his U.S. partners, or has he already maybe succeeded in that, to accept Russia's point of view before the negotiations resume?
He, of course, will be trying. That's what he's tried to do every time. And President Trump and Steve Witkoff finally had the opportunities to talk to President Zelensky and talk to the Ukrainian negotiating team. They now understand, the U.S. team now understands what it is that the Ukrainians are fighting for. They're fighting for their existence, and President Zelensky made that point to President Trump, and I'm sure Steve Witkoff understands it as well. And when President Trump suggested this energy ceasefire for a week, and he sees Putin violating it halfway through, then he will take steps to put pressure on Putin.
The American side claims there's a progress in peace and negotiations. And after that, Sergei Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister, speaks of Ukraine being only a pawn in the hands of the global of West, and demands the right for self-determination for Donbass and Crimea. So what is he trying to achieve? Is Russia trying to sabotage the negotiations again?
Of course, you're absolutely right. By the way, pay no attention to what Lavrov says. Pay no attention to what Peskov says. Pay no attention to what they say. Pay attention to what they do. President Putin keeps his mouth shut mostly, and he lets Lavrov and others pop off. So we shouldn't take their comments too seriously. They are spouting the long-time party line. And if there's going to be a change, it's going to come from Putin. And you have indicated earlier that President Trump does have leverage, does have influence over Putin. So if Trump can use that leverage, use that pressure, then Putin can make the decision. It's not going to be Lavrov.
Mm-hmm. So what do you expect from this next round of negotiations between Ukraine and Russia?
I would expect those two negotiating teams. I hope there'll be some Americans in the room. I understand Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner will not be there, but there will be other Americans in the room to help keep it on track, hold them to account, hold the Russians to account. And I hope that they come up with some concrete proposals that they can take to their two presidents, their three presidents, the President Trump and President Putin and President Zelensky. That's the purpose of these conversations. It's not to come to an agreement unless those presidents have already agreed, and I suspect they haven't agreed. But it is to come up with some options on how a ceasefire can be arranged, can be agreed, can be executed, can be monitored. And there, the military folks in Abu Dhabi can be of help.
You mentioned these means of pressure in the American hands. So what is happening with the American bone-crushing sanctions on the buyers of Russian oil?
So it turns out, Maciej, that they're maybe not bone-crushing, but it is certainly effective. We just got numbers over the last couple of days comparing last year's revenues going into Russia from the sale of oil and gas with this year's, and they're down 20%. Down 20% is a big number. That's having an effect not only on the civilian economy, it's also having an effect on the Russian war in Ukraine. So those pressure, it hasn't stopped the war yet, that's for sure, but it is putting real pressure, and Donald Trump can put more pressure with the Europeans. Europeans can do that as well.
Well, that's our perspective. Meanwhile, the Levada Center, a Russian public opinion pollster, has published a survey showing that some 76% of Russians support the war in Ukraine, and 1/3 would like the military actions to intensify if peace talks fail. Now, should we then prepare for long months, if not long years, of the conflict to come?
Ukrainians are preparing for both possibilities. Ukrainians know that they are there by themselves. They're getting support from the Europeans, from the Poles, from the British, from the EU, from NATO. They're getting support from the United States. They know that they need that support, and they know that they will continue to fight the Russians as long as it takes to get the Russians to stop their invasion. But they also would like to see it end. So they are negotiating in good faith. If they negotiate in good faith, and if Trump puts pressure on Putin to negotiate in good faith, there could be an agreement, at least a ceasefire. If not, the Ukrainians are prepared to continue to fight.
Right. I mean, you've spent many years in Ukraine. In your opinion, does the constant shelling of Ukraine's civilians help Moscow's chances of winning the war?
The opposite, Marche. It turns out, like we've seen in many other nations, many other fights, many other wars, when you bomb civilian populations and you attack kindergartens and you attack hospitals, you attack maternity wards, and you attack civilian high-rise apartments, you anger them. You make the Ukrainians, in this case, more determined than ever to prevail. They are not going to submit to this barbarism. The Ukrainians know that if they stop fighting, they'll be under the Russian thumb. They don't want that again. No one who has been under the Russian thumb, as Poles know, wants to be back again. So they'll continue to fight.
Now, Ukrainians surely feel the horrors of this war, but can the war end if the inhabitants of Russian cities don't fight themselves? I mean, is it that felt throughout Russia if mostly the poor, the minorities, convicts and foreigners are sent to the front lines in Ukraine?
That's the right question. And of course, the Russian people have very little say in their government, what their government is, who it is, much less what the government does. The government's doing what Putin wants it to do. The army is following the orders from Putin. He's not listening to the people. The people are oppressed. If they go out onto the street corner, they get arrested. So the Russian people are keeping their heads down. But 1.2 million Russian families, 1.2 million Russian families have had a soldier, a brother, father, sister, brother killed or severely wounded and in the hospital. That 1.2 million Russian families is sooner or later going to have their say.
It has to make an impact. William B. Taylor, former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, was our guest this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marche.
And thank you for watching, and stay with us for more interviews and news here on TVP World.